I just kind of coach football, and I just report the news.
Welcome into Teal, the show. I like that idea, Doug. We'll leave the football coaching to you, and we'll talk about the news here. I'm Jamal St. Cyr alongside Frank Frangie. Frank, we're almost there. The regular season, the preseason officially in the books. Jaguars' second undefeated preseason in franchise history. How about that?
Yeah, and I think you have an idea who they are, too. I think that's the whole point is after 3 games, you have a pretty good idea of who this football team is. I know they were preseason games, and the starters didn't play all that much. But I have a pretty good idea who I think they are. That's the best thing. You'll talk about cuts and details, but who the players on this team really are and what kind of team they'll be, I think we have a good idea.
All right, we'll talk a little bit about that as we start to look ahead toward the regular season here in just a second. But you kind of mentioned it there, cuts. The roster cuts have already started to trickle in over the next 2 days. The Jaguars will trim that roster down from 90 players to just 53. Now, one of the more, I guess you could say, difficult cuts for the Jaguars will be at tight end. Doug Peterson has a very personal relationship with one of the tight ends on the roster, Josh Peterson, Doug Peterson's son. He's been with the team all the way through training camp. Doug said that if it does come down to where Josh has to get cut, he'd like to be the one that breaks him the news.
I had to spank him at one point. Same thing? No. I'd want to tell him. Obviously Trent would want to visit with him as well, and I definitely want to talk to him and just let him know. I mean, he's been through this process before, with a couple other teams last year, and it's I'm very familiar with it, obviously, as a former player, and just walk them through the process and let them know that everything's going to be okay.
Well, you like that Doug Peterson's definitely at least having fun with it. Right. He understands that it's just the nature of the business.
The truth of the matter is Josh Peterson's a terrific kid, and he's a darn good football player. She showed that in the spring league. I think there's a chance he can play in the NFL. He wasn't here just because he was the coach's son. He's a pretty good player. I don't think he'll be on this team. I think Garrett Prince will wind up being the 4th tight end here, and they'll keep 4. But yeah, give a guy a chance. A lot of people got to watch him on tape, and that was the idea. Josh even said that early in camp. Dad, just give me a chance to play a little bit so other people can see my tape. And I think his tape looked pretty good.
All right. Now, one thing that we are keeping an eye on as the Jaguars do kind of trickle out these roster cuts, the Jaguars' injury situation. One injury that we want to talk about, Doug Peterson said that Ventrell Miller hurt his Achilles during that final preseason game of the year. Of course, Ventrell, that former Florida Gator, he's going to be done for the year. That opens up a roster spot there. But more importantly, it sidelines a rookie that the Jaguars really liked.
Yeah, there's no question. They like him. Ventrell Miller is a good player. He's probably one of their fastest linebackers. He's got a burst. He's got closing speed. He's explosive. He's a good player. He's a very good tackler. The problem is, can he stay healthy? That was his problem at Florida, and now you have to wonder. So he's down for the year. He'll go on injured reserve. They'll bring him back to camp next year and hope that he can get the injury thing under control. But know this, Ventrell Miller is a very good player. Can he stay on the field? And I mean faster than a lot of NFL linebackers, but can he stay on the field? That's the big question.
Well, the good news outside of Ventrell is that it sounds like the Jaguars are getting healthier at the right time as they start to get ready for week 1 of the regular season, which is right around the corner. This is kind of the lull before the storm, a chance for them to kind of recharge their batteries of sorts, a little bit of a bye week. Doug Peterson and the players in the locker room that I talked with all said there's a delicate balance of this week about recharging your batteries physically, but also recharging those batteries mentally for what they hope is going to be a long season.
Throughout the week, your focus immediately goes to Indianapolis, focusing on that opponent and, starting the early parts of the game plan. And then, you go into the weekend, you get a couple days off. So it's really just recharging and refreshing your body and your mind, kind of turning it off because it's the one last, time you are able to get that, for a couple weeks until, honestly, a bye week. But, you're still kind of on during that. So it's a good week. I like how they were able to do that, structure that. But immediately, honestly, starting Monday, we're straight to Indianapolis.
It was a long, tough training camp, so you definitely got to get your physical right, and then your mental right as well. Because as we all know, this game is a to me, it's more mental than physical these days. So you definitely got to know scheme. You got to know your scheme, the opposing offensive scheme, and just really try to be ahead of your opponent.
You know, Frank, perfect case scenario for this team, it's a 20-week season. 20 weeks gets you to the Super Bowl.
Well, and I will tell you, I think they know they've got a good team. They have a good team. That's what we've learned from them. They know that. They know expectations are there. Well, they're supposed to be there. That's the fun part, is when people expect you to be good and they expect the expectations to be there, and both of those are the case. That's what we thought going into camp. That's what we thought before the 3 preseason games. And you can tell listening to them, that's what they think and we think now.
Definitely some high expectations around this team. Coming up in Teal the Show, we'll start to talk about what those expectations are and what we know about this team that's going to be heading into the regular season. That's straight ahead when Teal the Show returns. Welcome back into Teal the Show. The Jaguars have wrapped up training camp, preseason in the books. Now it's time to start to look ahead toward the regular season. We've had a chance to get to know this team, see them all together out on the field. Doug Peterson feels like he has a pretty good grasp on what this team is, and they know that they're pretty good with some high expectations. The big question, Frank, is will they be able to reach those expectations when the games start to count?
Yeah, and I think they will. Listen, I said this on my radio show earlier today. I think they've got the 4th best team in the AFC at worst and the 7th best team in the NFL at worst. And I think they're going to get better. I think there's more room for growth there because they're still younger than some of the other teams. Trevor's a little younger than some of the other quarterbacks on those other 6 teams. I think the only teams in the AFC that might be better than them are the Chiefs, the Bengals, perhaps, and the Bills. I think the Eagles and the 49ers are very good in the NFC. After that, I think the Jags have, at worst, the next best team in the league, 7th at the very worst. And I think they're going to get better. I'm telling you, I think the Jags have a very good team. I think the league knows it. And, Jamal, I think the Jags know it.
Definitely some high expectations there. A part of reaching that plateau, that peak of those elite teams in the NFL is going to be the play of Trevor Lawrence and Trayvon Walker, the 2 #1 overall picks that the Jaguars have brought in lately. Let's start with Trevor Lawrence. Former Colts coach Chuck Pagano threw out the 5,000-yard mark for Trevor Lawrence. He said that he thinks Trevor can hit 5K. That's a number that hasn't been hit a lot in NFL history. 15 guys have done it before. Trevor definitely has some weapons around him. We've seen quarterbacks take big jumps when they get that elite receiver. Well, we've seen the Calvin Ridley enough to know that he is that elite receiver. Frank, do you think 5K can be in the cards for Mr. Lawrence?
It's a possibility. I don't think he's going to throw for that many yards, but I think he's going to be well into the 4s, and I think he's going to be well into the 30s on touchdowns, and I think he's going to keep his interceptions low. So you give me 34 touchdowns and 6 or 7 picks. You give me well into the 4s, you've had a heck of a season. So 5,000 is an awful lot. But the bottom line is what we're all saying is he's one of the elite quarterbacks. Again, Patrick Mahomes, Joe Burrow, Josh Allen, they're the elite quarterbacks. Justin Herbert, he's right there in that conversation. It's not just a bunch of Jacksonville people saying it because we want to talk about our guy. He's right there in that conversation, and I don't think anybody debates that.
He's definitely there, and the sheer amount of talent that he has to work with is the reason why you at least have to consider him being able to hit that 5,000-yard mark. I mean, we talk about Calvin Ridley, who's looked phenomenal. We can't forget about Christian Kirk, who's here. And Evan Ingram, Frank, I watched him last year in training camp, and I was a tad bit concerned. He looks like an even better player this year through training camp. He has been on fire. All right, the other #1 overall pick that's going to be a big part of what the Jaguars do is Trayvon Walker. Last year, we saw Trayvon. We've talked a lot about if he can be that pass rusher that the Jaguars need him to be. I got a chance to catch up with Trayvon after they wrapped up that final preseason game, and he says this is like night and day for him year 1 to year 2. Right now, he just feels like he can play.
It was just different because I get to go out there and play full speed, not as much thinking as I was last year coming into a new scheme. I feel like my mind is clear. I'm back to just playing ball as I was as a younger kid.
When you hear an athlete like Trayvon Walker say that he can now just go out there and play fast, Frank, that has to give you confidence because when you look around the football field, Trayvon's always going to be one of the best athletes out on the field.
Trayvon Walker's a good player. There's no debating he's a very good player. All players, defensive players, are better when they're not thinking about what to do. That's what he's saying. So when you learn a new defense and you're in a new league and new competition, you have to think, am I in the right spot? Do I have this gap? Do I have that gap? Wait a minute, do I stand up? Once that becomes instinctive and you're not having to think about it, then you just go, and I think that's what Trayvon's saying. Oh, boy, Trayvon Walker, when he can just go, is going to really go. I think he's going to have a huge year. I really think he's a good player, tough, physical, athletic. Can't wait to watch.
All right, when we look at this team as a whole, we've talked about the expectations that are around them, Frank, and we've talked that we think they have the talent to get there. Doug Peterson looks at this. This is a guy that's been to a Super Bowl, been there, done that, understands what a good football team looks like. Doug Peterson has to sit back and look at this offense and say, I don't know if he's had this sort of talent since he's been a head coach. I mean, that Eagles team had a very stacked offense, but this Jaguars offense is definitely built a little different.
It's one without holes. This is an offense that doesn't really seem to have an appreciable hole. I'm worried about the line a little bit with Cam down for 4 games, and Ben Bartz didn't play, although he played very well the other day, didn't play till the other day. But I think the line's going to be pretty good. If the line's good, there are no holes. You know Calvin Ridley gives them to take the top off the defense guy. We've seen what Zay Jones and Christian Kirk can be. They're good players. Evan Ingram, he wasn't even targeted in those 24 plays the other day, and it didn't even matter. Both running backs are good. Now you got a downhill guy, Bigsby, to go with ETN. There are no holes. You got to stay healthy, but if the offensive line can play, it'll be one of the best 3 or 4 offenses in the whole league, and I'm convinced of that.
Definitely probably end up being the best offense that the Jaguars have ever had in franchise history, right? So it should be a fun ride. One way or another, this is going to be an interesting season, one that we're not going to want to turn off for a second. Hopefully it's a wild ride that takes you all the way to Vegas, right? We'll have to keep an eye on that one. We've still got a little while until the Jaguars kick off that regular season against the Colts. Week 1, we'll have a couple more Teal the shows coming your way before then. Frank, thanks for being here. Thank you at home for tuning in. Good night, and go Jags.